Good morning, everyone. I just returned the quizzes on 7th chord back. And I do want to say, a very good job. Congratulations to those that got a perfect quiz. That's really good. I mean, that shows that you understand the material and that you could really do anything this class or anything that theory throws at you, you can understand that, and that's really nice to see. So today, what I'd like to do to get started with is, I would like to go over or cover the answers to the homework assignment today. I'm buried right now, and I'm swamped, and we've got tests coming up, and so I decided just today I'm not going to collect the assignment. And I'm not going to give you a quiz either. So what we're going to do is we're going to start on page 33 of the workbook. We'll take a look at your answers for how you analyze various types of 7th chords using the Roman numeral symbols that we learned last class. So on page 33, you just have to do section A. I don't know if you can see that too well. If it's too small, I can zoom in much further and we'll just look at like some of the problems, a section at a time. But for number 1, we, for instance, capital Roman numeral 4 with an M and then 4-3 to show its base position. Number 2 is lowercase 2, half diminished 7, root position. Number 3, a minor 4 with a 7. Number 4 is a minor 6 Roman numeral with the base position symbol 4-2. Number 5, capital 3, M7. Number 6, capital 1 with an M7. And number 7, capital 6 Roman numeral with an M7. Number 8 is what we call a 5-6-5. Remember, I had stressed how you're supposed to distinguish between capital Roman numerals and lowercase Roman numerals, right? Okay. Otherwise, if it's not clear, I'll have to mark it wrong. Number 9, lowercase 3 with a 7. 10 is a 7 half diminished 4-3. Number 11 is a 2-7. 12, very close, just a 2-7 in first inversion, so 2-6-5. 13 is 7 fully diminished 7. 14 is capital 3, M7, and finally 15 is a lowercase 6 with a 7. That means it must be a minor 7. Does anyone have any questions, concerns, or comments about any of these answers? Now is a good time to ask if you do have some. And the next thing I'd like to go over is your analysis on page 34 of the workbook. How did that go, by the way? That was probably pretty tricky. That's your first. Some of your first attempts, not your very first, but probably one of your earlier attempts at analyzing chords in music. So the first, by the way, this is in the key of B flat. How do I know it's in B flat and not Good question, huh? Do you know?
You can look at the last note, it's usually in the key.
That's right, the last note really helps. So the key signature plus the last note will help you. In this case, the first base note will also reinforce your initial assumptions. But because we got two flats in the key signature and the last note is a B flat, not only in the treble staff but also in the bass staff, that's a good indicator that we're dealing with the key of B flat major, not the key of G minor. Good. So all of my Roman numerals are going to be catered around and be in relationship to the B flat major scale. The B flat major scale. So the first measure is just capital Roman numeral 1. And I won't go through this for every single measure, but one of the reasons I can say that is because if you look at every pitch in the first full measure, the only three different notes you find are B flat, D, and F. B flat, D, and F, three different pitches, they form a triad, not a seventh chord. They form a major triad. And do you see how B flat, which is the root of those three pitches, do you see how B flat is the lowest note in that measure? So that's why, because B flat is the root, I have a Roman numeral 1. I know that in major keys, Roman numeral 1s are uppercase. It's a major triad. And I don't need any inversion symbols or base position numbers because it's in root position. Maybe the second measure is the last one I'll go through like this, unless you have specific questions. If I look at all the pitches in the second full measure here, I know that there are 4 different tones. I have F, A, C, and E flat. So that means I'm looking at a 7th chord. The root of the pitch is F, A, C, E flat. When you stack them all in thirds, the lowest note would be F. So the root happens to be F, and that's why I use a Roman numeral 5. Last class we talked about how all 5s, Roman numeral, triads, and 7th chords are capital. They're always capital or uppercase. And then I also noticed that the third of this 7th chord, the A, is the lowest tone of all in the measure. And when the third of the 7th chord is on the bottom, that means it's in first inversion. And the numbers to indicate first inversion, that bass position, are 6, 5. So my final answer for this chord to fill in the blank is capital 5 and the 6, 5. That's how I get that information. I'm trying to summarize all that information, what's going on with the chord in the measure, and then I capture all that information with a Roman numeral and a bass position symbol. So you can see what the rest of the chords are. Now that you can see the answers, does anyone have a question on how I got a particular Roman numeral for a particular measure?
Could you do the third one?
The third measure?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay? So this measure here, if I look at all the pitches in the measure, I've got F, A, C, E flat. Now, in the instructions, it says here, one of the last sentences, for the purposes of this exercise, ignore the G5 in measure 3. So I put parentheses around it, that's a way to tell me that it doesn't enter into my analysis. It's not part of the chord. We'll get to those at the end of the semester. But anyway, so I have F, A, C, E flat. The root of those 4 notes is F, which makes me use the Roman numeral 5 because F is scale degree 5 in B flat major. All Roman numeral 5s are always capital, uppercase. And because F, the root, is the lowest tone in the measure, you see how that F on the downbeat there, beat 1? It's the lowest tone of all, so that means the triad, or excuse me, the 7th chord is in root position. And to indicate a root position 7th chord, I just use the number 7. So I have a capital Roman numeral 5 with a 7. And that's really all I can say about the notes in that measure. There's nothing more I can really tell about those. Good.
I just forgot to ignore the G, so that's kind of my bad.
You forgot to ignore the
I
G?
forgot to ignore it.
Yeah, I know if you don't read the instructions up here, it's going to be pretty hard because then you've got 5 different pitches, I think, to work with. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because if only dealt with triads of 3 notes and 7 chords of 4 notes. Yeah. Okay, good. Any other questions about any of these bars or these measures? Did you have, I understand, I know some students will always ask this, you notice the last measure, there's only 2 different pitches? What do you make of that?
My crystal leader just assumed that there was an F.
Yeah, in that case, because we know we're in B flat major, and because we know that most of our exercises and examples and pieces that we deal with in this class will end on a what's called a tonic chord, we can just assume that there is an F there, even though there isn't. We have the B flat and the D, we just don't have the F. But for now, just assume that if you don't have enough pitches in the last chord of an example or exercise, or the last measure, just assume that it's probably going to be some kind of tonic, some kind of 1 chord built on scale degree 1. Yeah. Some composers do that. You don't really need the 5th of a triad to hear the sound of the triad to make sense of it in your mind. And so sometimes composers leave the 5th of the triad out, even though it makes it a little more confusing for us, unfortunately. Yes?
Could you explain why the 5th measure is?
1/6?
Yeah.
You bet. Okay, so all the notes in this measure here, measure 5, are B flat, D, and F. Should be. So that means we know the root of those 3 notes is B flat. And B flat is scale degree 1, so that's why I've got a Roman numeral 1. But is B flat the lowest note in the measure?
Oh, no.
No, D is actually the lowest note in the measure. And that's the 3rd of the triad. And when the 3rd of the triad is on the bottom, we say the triad is in first conversion. So that's why I had to use the number 6. That's the number we use to show first conversion triads. Yep, that's right. Let me go ahead and, if you just give me a moment, I'm going to connect to whatever I'm supposed to connect to in here so that I can use the speakers here. And I would like to play this example. I just need to take a moment to connect to the network first. Let me do this first of all. All right. Let's hope that that does the trick. And now I can play the sound file and you can follow along. Or not.
I think you have to connect to the TVs.
Oh, I think, yeah, you're right. I don't think I have the right source. So I'm going to have to black out the TVs, and maybe we'll try this, and then you can just follow along in your... Yeah, let's try it now.
It's 4-2, C1.
Okay, drop your little piece there. So, if you're okay with that, we'll just, you can hang on to that. I don't need it today. We'll move on now to one of the last important topics of this unit. By the way, I think, is it next week we have a test? Yeah, I think we have a test a week from Friday. Is that your birthday? Is that?
No.
No. I can schedule tests for your birthday. You
No,
just
my
come and
birthday-
ask me and I'll do that, you know.
My birthday's on the first day of registration on a Monday.
The first day of the spring semester or the fall semester?
Spring semester.
Also in January. No,
The 20th.
first day of registry.
Yeah,
Oh, that's at the end of the month.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, as far as I know.
Well, no, I mean, you know when your birthday is.
Lexi, do you know what
No, I don't even know how to spell my name half the time, but.
Okay. All right, well, good to know. Now, Today we're going to be talking about something called figured bass. And this is not a necessarily easy concept, but really, what is really easy in this class, right? No, it shouldn't be any more challenging than any of the other topics we talked about. In fact, figured bass is related very closely related to the inversion numbers and bass position symbols that we have been using so far with triads and seventh chords. Okay? Now, the numbers we've been using so far to indicate the various bass positions of triads and seventh chords, they are derived from an older system. And we're talking about a really old system that developed during the, if you've ever heard of the Baroque period or the Baroque era in music. And I'm not going to quiz you or test you on this, but the Baroque period in music is generally agreed upon to be between the years 1600 and 1750. So we're talking a long, long time ago. And as I said, our inversion numbers that we use with triads and seventh chords, they're derived from a system, a number system which developed back during this period. And the system was called figured bass. Figured bass. In a nutshell, basically what composers did back then, instead of writing out all the notes of triads and seventh chords for certain performers, they would just write the bass note out, and they put a set of numbers or figures right next to the bass note, and that would tell the player or the performer how to play an entire triad or an entire seventh chord, just by one note in the bass and a combination of numbers with it, and that was it. Okay. In fact, you can. I'll get to this in a little bit, but let me increase the size of this so you can see it. You see just the bass staff there? You see all those notes in the bass with numbers or symbols, figures, we call them figures underneath? There was a keyboard player that would be able to just read from the bass clef staff those bass notes in the left hand, and then all the numbers would tell the keyboard player what to play in the right hand. No music needed, and the keyboard player could just play the whole thing. So, back in the 17th and the 18th centuries, which is what we're talking about here, a keyboard was a required instrument in virtually every ensemble. You see how there's only 3 staves there? Really, the top 2 are for violins in this piece, and the bottom staff is for either, most likely a cello. I guess it could be a bassoon or some kind of bass instrument. But even for just the 3 staves here, even in string trios, keyboard instruments were required. They were required to fill out the chords, fill out the harmonies when not every single note of a chord or harmony was being played simultaneously by the ensemble, by the instruments in the ensemble. Okay? So, string trio, small orchestra, opera, you name it. Back in this period, a keyboard was required, basically. Even if there wasn't a separate grand staff used and written for keyboard music, a keyboard was required. In these ensembles, as I said, the keyboardist's primary job was to play chords to clarify and fill in harmonies that could only be maybe implied by the instrumental parts. So if you had like a duet between a cello and a violin, most likely you'd have a keyboardist playing along with them back then to fill in harmonies that could only be implied by just 2 pitches. And here we can only have 3 pitches sound at once, so you can't get full 7th chord sounds, which would have 4 notes. And so the keyboardist was used again to fill in and help the listener follow along what the harmony was supposed to be. As I mentioned though, the keyboardist part, what the keyboardist read from, this consisted only of a bass line and some numbers underneath, and that was all. That was all. Now, this is the main part, a big part of understanding figure bass. These numbers, or figures, as they were called, they indicated what the other members of the full chord were to be by way of referring to intervals above intervals above the base, that's what the number is referred to. And at these particular intervals above the base, like you see there's some 6s and some 7s above, those refer to that distance above the base. At those intervals above the base, other members of the chord were to be understood, or that's where other members of the chord were. And the keyboardist was supposed to be able to read those numbers and fill in the rest of the notes on the chord above the bass. You get a complete triad and a complete seventh. Okay. Yeah, we don't necessarily need to know that. Okay. But the notes above the bass, that's one thing we definitely need to pay attention to here. Back in this time, I need to tell you that they didn't have the theory of chord roots and thirds and fifths yet, like we do. You know how we label the members of a chord like the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh. They didn't really have all that stuff yet, and so those numbers there strictly refer to intervals above the lowest sounding note above the bass. So we can use that system to generate or to understand and realize full chords and full triads and seventh chord. And then after we fill in and realize all the notes of the triad or seventh chord, then we can go back and look at the chord with 21st century eyes, and we can identify it as, major, minor, what inversion it's in, all that kind of thing. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing. We're going to be learning how to generate the rest of the notes above the bass in all these full chords, triads and seventh chords. And then after we understand and know them, then we're going to look at the chord fully with 21st century eyes. And we're going to see whether it's major, minor, augmented, diminished, what type of seventh chord it might be, and we're going to be able to tell what the root is and the inversion is and all that stuff. So it's kind of a two-part process. First, understand what the figures mean. Generate the full chord. And then look at the chord with our modern 21st century eyes based on what we've been learning the past several weeks, and tell me some information about that chord. That's kind of how it's going to go. Okay? Now, the notes above the bass at these particular intervals, they actually followed the key signature of the music, unless the performer was told to do otherwise, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But all these intervals above the bass, they followed and they had to obey the key signature of the music. They told the keyboardist whether or not the notes above the bass were flat, natural, or sharp. Let me give you a little bit of just an introductory taste of this. Let's say I'm in the bass clef here, and I have this key signature, one sharp, and I have this note in the bass. And I have this set of figures or numbers written underneath the bass note. And from this information here, these figures, we're supposed to fill in the remaining chord members according to the figure bass. Now, do these numbers mean I'm supposed to calculate intervals below the note? No. All these numbers, even though they're written down here, these numbers refer to notes at these intervals always above the bass. Don't ever write anything below the given note when you're dealing with figure bass. You always add notes and realize notes above the given note. So, what note is a third above a D? Just give me the pitched letter name. F. And what note is a fifth above the bass D? A. I have realized and filled out this complete chord. It is a triad. What kind of triad is it? Well, the key signature is going to determine what type of F I have, right? So D, F sharp A gives me what kind of triad? Major, minor, augmented, or diminished? Major. These numbers don't tell me you're supposed to play major triad above, no, they don't tell me any of that. It just tells me you have to plug in these pitch letter names above, at these distances above the bass, and the key signature is going to tell you exactly whether they're natural, flat, or sharp. Okay? Let's try another one. I I got one base note here, a C. Oh, and by the way, the base note is always correct. Don't ever adjust or change the base note by adding an accidental to it. The composer fills in the base note for the performer, and the composer knows that the base note is correct. So you never need to add an accidental or change the base note. That is always a given. Okay, there's my figure. By the way, have we seen the numbers 5, 3 before? Do they not indicate a root position trig? Let's do this one. We have to kind of pretend like we're back in the 1600s or the 1700s, and these numbers just refer to intervals above the base. Okay, so what letter name or pitch is a second above the base C?
E.
A second above C?
Oh,
E.
D, okay. And what note is a fourth above a C? F. And what note is a sixth above a C?
okay.
Okay. Now, does the key signature affect any of these pictures? Yeah, it affected this one, the F. So after I just plug in those notes at those intervals above the base, that's all I'm doing there. Now let's take a step back, and with modern 21st century eyes, can you tell me what kind of seventh chord this is? What the root is? Those kinds of things? What is the root of this seventh chord? D. I would agree. D, F sharp, A, C. What type of which of the 5 types of seventh chords is that?
Is that a major minor?
That's right, it's a major minor seventh. And, well, I don't know, yeah. Can you tell me what bass position it's in? Is the root on the bottom, is it stacked in thirds? No. So it's in one of the 3 inversions. Do you know which inversion of the seventh chord it's in?
Is it third inversion?
Third inversion. See? But it's kind of like, I kind of like try to separate the whole process into 2 big lumps. Number 1, just plug in and figure out what these notes are above the bass. And use the key signature to govern what those exact pitches are. Then after that, take a step back, look at it with our 21st century modern eyes, and start to figure out what the root is, and what type of chord it is, and what inversion it is. I think that's the best way to get started with understanding how to use figured bass. Do the one thing, pretend you don't know anything about roots or anything like that. You just know intervals, and that's it. So you put in the notes above the bass, and then after that, put your thinking cap on, and then look at it as a chord we've been studying for the past week or 2. Okay. How about one more of these? B is my bass note, and I just have the figure 6-3. Help me realize or fill out that entire chord that's indicated by the figures. What note is a third above the bass? A D, right? And what note is a sixth above the bass? B. G. So it looks like we have a triad. It's not in root position. What type of triad is that? Major, minor, augmented, or diminished? GBD. As a major triad. And does anyone know what inversion what inversion is?
Second inversion?
Not exactly.
Oh, wait, no, it's just, first inversion.
First inversion. Because GBD is the root position and B, the third of the chord, is on the bottom. Is this making sense so far? I hope. Okay. Now, we've seen a lot of these symbols before. In fact, this number right here, 642, that's the full symbol for a third inversion seventh chord. And 6-3, that's the full set of bass position numbers for a first inversion triad. So there's a lot of similarities here, even though back in this time period, they didn't refer to chords in inversion and with roots and thirds and things like that, okay? But, like the inversion numbers we've been using with our Roman numerals, composers omitted several of the numbers in their figure bases. The omitted numbers are supposed to be understood, however, as being present. So really, you know how 5-3 indicates root position? Remember how we decided that you don't have to have any numbers at all? Well, in figure base, if there are no numbers underneath a base note, it means a root position triad. That's what it means. And you know how the first inversion triads, we took away the 3? Well, the figure base just 6. That means, what that means is, to our modern eyes, it means a first inversion triad. And you have to just assume and understand that this is what the figure base really means, even though that 3 isn't written there. Okay? And of course, 4-2 is shortened, or 6-4-2 is shortened to 4-2. But we have to realize for figure base to get the full 7th chord, we have to infer and interpret that that number is still there. I have shown you this page before, this table, this chart on page 44. And this table, this chart holds true for figure base as well. So if you see in the base, next to a base note, if you see the number just 6-5, you have to infer and interpret and interpolate and understand that the full symbol is 6-5-3 and get all of those notes in above the base. And if you just see 4-3, it really means 6-4-3. And 4-2 really means 6-4-2. And finally, just a 7 underneath a base note really means the full symbol is 7-5-3. It's a 7th chord with 4 unique distinct pitches. Even though there's just one number in the figure base, it really means all that, 7-5-3. And I've referred to this chart before, but it really comes in handy and it really comes into play with what we're learning and studying right now. That's it there. Okay? So, even though we don't have all the numbers sometimes in a figure, the omitted numbers are to be understood as being present and require notes on the staff to form a complete triad or a complete 7th chord always. 3-note triads, 4-note 7th chords. All right, now, let's try a few of these abbreviated symbols. I'll still leave 1 sharp in the key signature. These are going to be the same thing. No numbers underneath. Does that mean I can just skip that? Does that mean the player doesn't play any chord? He or she just plays D, bonk. No. No numbers means what? Okay, yeah. In this, yeah, technically, if we're pretending we're back in this time period, it means this. And so you can just then fill in, and you have no problem, a 3rd and 5th above the base. Now you can look at it with modern eyes. All right, let's try this one. What is the full symbol? It doesn't give me all the numbers I need. I'm supposed to infer and assume what?
6-4-2.
Thank you, 6-4-2. And now I can put in all the notes at these intervals above the base. You see how that works? And then finally, something like this, if I just have a 6, what's really the full symbol to give me a full
3.
Yeah, 6-3. Just assume that. And then I can get a complete triad as my final answer. A 3rd and a 6th above the base, above the lowest note. Questions so far? This is, I don't know, to me, I really like going back in history and looking at things like this. And figuring out how musicians worked and what they thought of, and you know how they performed, and you know again their thought process back then. It's really amazing to me, the things that they did. All right, now, what if, because, some composers aren't gonna necessarily want to have the performers play notes that fall in the key signature, according to the key signature every time. What if a composer wants the keyboardist to play a note that's outside of the key signature? Well, there were different symbols, different ways to show or tell the keyboardist in the figures that you were supposed to overrule or override the key signature and play other notes instead. So let's talk about some of the ways that, or some of the symbols used in connection with these numbers or figures that composers gave to musicians to override or overrule the key signature. Okay, so I'll still stick with this one sharp in the key signature, and I've got C in the bass. Now, what if you had an accident, let's see, I want to make sure, an accidental next to a number, or next to a figure, told the keyboardist to apply that accidental to the note at that interval above the bass. Okay, so you may see this. This is a common figure. What intonation does that mean? Well, first of all, pretend there was no accidental there and you just saw a 7. What's the full symbol for just a 7?
7, 5, 3.
All right, let's put it in there. That's to be understood. All right, now, the only thing new here is there's an accidental, a flat, right next to the 7. What that meant is that when you write the note that is a 7th above the bass, put a flat on that note. Put that very accidental on this note that far above the bass. So instead of, if I didn't have the flat, I would have 7, 5, 3. I'd have this, but because there's a flat next to the 7, I actually place that exact symbol, that exact accidental, on the note a 7th above the bass. So again, an accidental next to a number told the keyboardist to apply that very accidental to the note at that interval above the bass. Yes?
What if the composer wanted them to scale on like 5 or 3?
Then, okay, yeah, then what the composer would have to do is he'd have to reveal or show the 5 or the 3 with an accidental next to it. That's right. Let's try something like this. Don't even worry about whether it's a 7th chord, whether it's root position, what inversion. Don't even worry about that at this stage. We're just plugging in intervals above the bass. Notes at those intervals above it. 4, 3. What's the full symbol?
6, 4, 3.
Okay, so we have to assume that. There's my full symbol. Now let's plug in the notes above the bass. A third above a C is an E, right? A fourth above a C is an F. But what does this natural tell me to do?
That's natural.
That's right. It tells me to put a natural on the note a fourth above the bass, the F. And then a 6th above the bass looks like it's an A. And there's my final answer. But you see, this natural on the 4 tells the keyboard player to play F natural. In other words, override the key signature. Otherwise, the F would have been F sharp. So the final answer here is C, E, F natural, and A. Have I lost anyone yet? Let's try one more of these. That's the only information you get. You get a bass note B, and you get a sharp 6 figure. 6 by itself, again, don't worry about the accidentals. What's the full symbol?
6, 3.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, you gotta know this though. Otherwise it's gonna be very confusing. Okay? So let's plug in the notes for this chord at these intervals above the bass, so we know exactly what the composer wants. A third above the bass is a B. A 6th above the bass is a G, but what am I supposed to do to the G?
Sharp.
Yep, put a sharp on it. Now we step back and look at it with modern eyes, and I see, oh, that's a G sharp B D. That's a diminished triad. It's in first inversion. But if I didn't follow these symbols correctly first, I would be totally in the dark. I'd be lost. I wouldn't even know what I should be looking at. There was another way that composers sometimes told the keyboard player to play notes outside of the key signature. And sometimes they use things like slashes or plus signs. Okay? I'm going to actually change the key signature here. Remember, the notes above the bass have to follow the key signature unless the performer is told to do otherwise. So let's take a look at something like this. And here I've got a B flat on the bass, and I've got this, a slash through a number. A slash through a number means to raise that note a half step higher than what the key signature normally calls for on that note. Let me say that again. A slash with a number, or on a number I should say, means to raise that note a half step higher than what the key signature would normally call that note. So let's go ahead and fill out this one completely. 4-2 is the shortened symbol. What's the full symbol?
6-4-2.
That's right, 6-4-2. Does it matter that there's a slash there? It doesn't. It's still 4-2. So that means the full symbol is 6-4-2. Okay, a second above the bass is C. A fourth above the bass is E. What?
Flat.
But what does this tell me to make it? That's right, raise it a half step. So normally, see, if you think that this means I should put E sharp, that's wrong. Because without the slash, this defaults to E flat from the key signature. You see that? But the slash through means to raise that note a half step higher than what the key signature would normally make it. So I got to put a natural, and then a sixth above the bass to finish it off is a G. So it turns out my seventh chord is C, E, G, B flat. Not C, E flat, G, B flat. Okay. A plus next to a number means the exact same thing as a slash. So for instance, what if you saw something like that? It means plus and slash mean the exact same thing. Raise the note at that interval above the bass, raise it a half step from what the key signature would normally make it. 6 is the only number I get. The full symbol is 6-3. Let's go ahead and fill in what we need to do. A third above the bass is, I'm using this key signature now, F. And a sixth above the bass is a B, but it's not going to be B flat because this tells me to overrule the key signature. What is it going to be? B natural, yes. Thank you. You see how I can get that? You can't forget about the key signature. If the key signature affects a note, that affects the note above the bass. These extra symbols will tell you to go one step further than and overrule the key signature. All right, going on. There's just a few more symbols to learn, and then we can be done. Sometimes, let me get a key signature first on here. Sometimes you'll see a bass note, such as this, and in the midst of a figure, you'll have a natural that's just by itself. Or, yeah, an accidental by itself. In other words, this accidental is not connected with any kind of number. There's no interval number it's connected to. And when you see an accidental by itself that is not with a number, it always refers to the note a third above the bass. An accidental by itself always refers to a note a third above the bass. That's what you're supposed to assume, safely assume. So when I'm given this, you might say, what do I do with that? Well, an accidental by itself, not associated or connected with a number, always means plug in the third. It refers to the node third above the base. So now look at this, 4, 3. What's the full symbol? 6, 4, 3, right? Now we know what we're dealing with here. And let's plug in the nodes at these intervals above the base. Okay, a third above an E is a G, but this tells me it's not G sharp according to the key signature, but G what?
Natural.
Yes, good, G natural. Then a fourth above the base is an A, and a sixth above the base is a C, and the key signature tells me that that C is what?
Sure.
C sharp. So, when I step back and look at this seventh chord now with modern eyes, I have to realize what I have is A, C sharp, E, G natural. And that'll give me the right answer as to what type of seventh chord it is. Because the accidentals are all in place. Okay. Last but not least, let's go to C major here. No flats, no sharps. I'm going to cancel everything. Let me see. Oh, yeah. I see. What happens if you see a solitary accidental and that's it? So for instance, let's say I have a G in the bass and that's all I have for my figure, just a flat. Which interval of the bass does the flat refer to?
Third.
The third. But again, is that a full figure though? I mean, which symbol does that really refer to when you just have a 3? What's the full symbol? Yeah, it's actually you assume 5-3, not 6-3. So when you're only given a 3, you can safely assume 5-3, not 6-3. If it was going to be 6-3, they'd have to show you the 6. But if they just show you a 3, it's got to be 5-3. So plug in the nodes above the bass, and the third above the bass actually has to be flat. So G, B flat, D is the full chord that we're looking for there. One more example to leave you with. G in the bass. Those are the figures. Flat 7 over a flat. We can fill in some things, first of all. What interval above the bass does this refer to?
Third.
Third. Okay.
Remember the 5 in the middle of it?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to point that out. We've got a 7 and a 3 that's almost a full symbol, but it's not quite. 7, 5, 3 is the full symbol. So don't assume that the 5 goes here or something. You know, just they always go in order, descending order, these figures. So this is what we're looking at here. You've got to infer 7, 5 in the middle, flat 3. And now fill in the intervals above the bass. So a flat for a third above the bass, a fifth above the bass according to the key signature, and a seventh above the bass. But what do I do to the seventh above the bass?
Flat.
Flat it. That's right. And now take a step back and look at it with modern eyes. I want you to understand that when you see something by a 3 like this, or anything 3, it doesn't mean necessarily the third of the chord. You see, because they weren't thinking about roots and thirds and fifths and sevenths back then. A 3 in a figure means the note that's a third above the bass, and that's all. It could be the third of the chord, but it might not be the third of the chord, depending on the bass position of the final outcome. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's really crucial to keep straight. It does not necessarily always mean the third of the chord. It could be sometimes, but that's just a coincidence. This just means whatever note is a third above the bass.
So is there not a symbol to lower notes? Is it just
Well, the flat is really the only one. Yeah. They don't have any others like, slashes or minuses or anything like that. So. Yep. Okay. Well, we just got enough through it. You've got enough to complete your assignment for Friday, which is a handout. I was going to play this
just what you're on
Thank you. You hear the harpsichord? The TV sound, that's a keyboard, it's real like, real like an old You can go when you get there. I'm just gonna listen to this. All right,
Thank
now,
you.
just so you know, in the future, these will need to be, you can take pictures of these and send them to me as they're assigned by the due dates,
Okay,
even when you're in quarantine.
okay,
Okay, that's the normal procedure for
Oh,
something like
okay.
this, okay?
thank you.
All